When my sister Lisa died 2 years ago, our family changed forever. Not the way people mean when they say that at funerals, where it sounds like something you're supposed to say. I mean, it changed the way a bone changes after it breaks wrong. It heals, kind of, but the shape is different now, and you can always feel where the fracture was. My dad stopped talking much. Not completely, just the easy kind of talking. The kind where you say something without thinking about it first. My mom started volunteering for every charity event in the county, which sounds nice until you realize she's never home. And me, I've been stuck. That's the only word for it. Stuck and angry, and for a long time, I didn't even know who I was angry at. Lisa was the one who kept us all connected. That sounds like something you'd put on a greeting card, but it was just true. She'd be the one to call my dad on a random Wednesday for no reason. She'd be the one to drag us all to dinner and make it feel normal. She laughed a lot, too loud sometimes, and she took pictures of everything. Sunsets, coffee cups, the neighbor's weird dog. She had this whole hiking photography thing going. That was her. Her death was officially ruled an accident. She slipped on a trail and fell into a ravine. I've read the police report so many times I have it memorized. Loose gravel, unstable edge. No signs of foul play. I read it again last night. I'm still not sure I believe it. I need to tell you about Matt before I tell you the rest, because none of this makes sense without him. He and Lisa dated for about a year. I only met him a handful of times. Family dinners, a birthday party once, and every time I came away feeling like something was slightly off. Not in a way I could name. He was polite. He smiled at the right moments. He asked questions about you and seemed to listen to the answers. But there was something underneath all of it that made me want to leave the room. Lisa broke up with him about 6 months before she died. She was pretty vague about the reasons at first. Just said it wasn't working. But one night we were sitting on her apartment floor eating takeout and she told me more. He texted constantly. Not just a lot, constantly. She'd shown me her phone once as a joke, scrolling through message after message, and she'd called him her stage 5 clinger and laughed. And I'd laughed too, but even then I didn't think it was actually funny. He'd shown up at her work twice, left voicemails, she said. She couldn't bring herself to delete because they were so strange. Not angry, just quiet and close, like he was talking to her from a foot away. She said he'd get bored eventually. Move on. I thought she was right. Until the funeral. And then after it, and then for the next 2 years. He didn't come to the service. I'll give him that. But a week after we buried her, he was standing at our front door, holding a bouquet of white lilies. It was a Thursday. I remember because it had been raining all day. That gray, flat kind of rain that doesn't come down hard, just hangs in the air and gets into everything. My mom opened the door, and I heard his voice from the hallway, that soft, careful voice he had, saying he just wanted to pay his respects. I came to the doorway and watched my mom step back to let him in. He sat on our couch and talked about Lisa for almost an hour. He described the way she laughed, the way she always ordered pancakes with extra syrup at diners. He said she used to hum to herself without noticing, some song she couldn't name. My dad sat in the armchair across from him with his jaw set and his eyes somewhere else entirely, and I stood in the doorway, holding a mug of tea I'd forgotten to drink, gone cold in my hands. When Matt finally left, I asked my mom why she'd let him in. "He's grieving too," she said. I looked at the front door for a moment. Outside, through the small window beside it, I could see his car still sitting in the driveway. Just sitting there. "He stalked her," I said. My mom's face did something complicated. "He was persistent. That's different." I didn't say anything else. I went upstairs and stood at my bedroom window and watched his car until it finally pulled away. It took another 10 minutes. After that, he kept appearing. Family barbecue in July. Matt was there, standing by the grill with a beer, talking to my uncle like they were old friends. My dad's birthday dinner at the restaurant we always went to. Matt was at the end of the table, somehow, and I still don't know exactly how that happened. Christmas Eve at my parents' house. I came downstairs at 9 in the morning, and there he was in the kitchen, pouring himself coffee like he'd been there for hours. My mom always had an explanation. He'd called. She'd mentioned it. She didn't think I'd mind. He was harmless, she said. He just missed Lisa. I'd watch him at these things. The way he moved through our house, picking up objects and setting them down, touching the frame of a photo here, running his finger along a bookshelf there. He never looked like he was grieving. He looked like he was taking inventory. The kitchen conversation was the one that stayed with me the longest before the trail. It was Christmas last year. I'd gone to get more ice from the garage freezer and was cutting back through the kitchen when I nearly walked into him. He was leaning against the counter like he'd been waiting. "She was different with me," he said. No greeting, no lead-up, just that. I stopped. The kitchen smelled like my mom's cooking, butter and something sweet. And behind me I could hear the TV and everyone talking and laughing, and somehow all of that felt very far away. "What does that mean?" I said. He tilted his head slightly. "She told me things she wouldn't tell anyone else." The refrigerator hummed. Outside the window over the sink it was dark. "Like what?" I said, and I don't know why I asked. Some part of me wanted him to say something I could dismiss, something small and weird that I could write off later as him just being odd. He smiled. The kind of smile that doesn't have anything behind it, like how she wasn't scared to die. I didn't say anything. I don't think I could have. I just looked at him for a moment, and he looked back, and then my mom called from the other room asking if I'd found the ice, and I turned around and left him standing there. I found Lisa's journals that night. Read them until 3 a.m. Most of it was normal. Song lyrics she liked, grocery lists, doodles in the margins. But near the back, I found an entry from about 2 months before she died. And I had to read it 3 times before I was sure I was reading it right. I think Matt's been following me. He won't stop texting. Keeps saying he knows something I don't. I'm starting to feel like I can't shake him. I took the journal to my mom the next morning. She held it for a long time, reading it, and I watched her face. "Lisa was dramatic sometimes," she finally said. "I'm sure it's nothing." She handed it back to me and went to start the coffee. I started noticing his car after that. Not parked directly outside. He wasn't stupid. But down the street, near the corner, that silver car that I'd never paid attention to before. I'd see it when I left for work in the morning. I'd see it when I came home. I told myself it was coincidence. I told myself it a lot. My dad's birthday was last week. Matt showed up with a gift, a coffee table book about hiking trails. He said it was something Lisa would have bought. He was probably right, which made it worse somehow. My parents went inside to get plates, and I followed him out to the backyard, away from the door. "What are you doing here?" I said. He turned around and looked at me the same way he always looked at me. Patient, like he had more time than I did. "Paying my respects. She broke up with you. She didn't want you here. She didn't want you anywhere near her." Something shifted in his eyes. Not anger, something flatter. "She told you that?" "Yes." He took one step closer. He smelled like cold air and something else I couldn't place. Something chemical and faint. When he spoke, his voice dropped low enough that I had to hold still to hear it. "She told me things, too. Things she didn't tell anyone else." Then he said, "I was there, you know, on the trail." The yard was quiet. Somewhere down the street, a dog was barking at something. My dad's birthday playlist was drifting out through the open window. Normal sounds. Everything normal. "What?" I said. "She didn't fall." He paused, like he was deciding how much to give me. "She looked me in the eyes and asked me to let her go." I could hear my own heartbeat. That's not a dramatic thing to say. I mean, I literally could hear it, that thick pulse in my ears. "You're lying," I said. He tilted his head. "Ask yourself something. If she slipped, if it was just an accident, why didn't she scream?" I called the police that night. I told them everything. The visits, the journal, the car parked down the street, what he'd said in the backyard. The officer on the phone was careful and polite and asked me to come in the next morning to give a formal statement. When the police went to Matt's apartment, it was empty. Not between tenants empty. Completely empty. The landlord said he'd vacated 2 weeks ago. No forwarding address, left nothing behind. Like he'd been planning to disappear before I ever said a word. It's been 8 days. I haven't told my parents what he said about the trail. I don't know how to. And I don't know if they'd believe me. And I don't know what believing me would do to them. Every night I check the locks on every door and both ground floor windows. I sleep with my phone on the pillow next to me. I wake up at small sounds. The building settling, the heat clicking on, and I lie there in the dark and wait for my breathing to slow down. Last night I went back to Lisa's journal. I don't know what I was looking for. Some other entry I'd missed. Maybe. Something that would give me an answer. Or take one away. The last page had been blank the last time I read it. It wasn't blank anymore. Scrawled across it in uneven black ink, pressed deep into the page like whoever wrote it was gripping the pen too hard. He's not watching. He's inside. I've thought a lot about what Matt said in the backyard. About Lisa looking at him and asking him to let her go. Part of me wonders if he meant it the way I heard it, or if there's another way to hear it, something I can't bring myself to sit with yet. If you were standing there on that trail, would you have let her go? Or would you have reached out, no matter what she asked? Every elementary school has a ridiculous urban legend. My school had Muppet Man, and I hated him. Muppet Man was deformed. That's the story we were told. Anyway, that some kind of plastic surgery gone wrong had left him. with the proportions of a marionette, all wrong angles and too long limbs. And so he'd stolen a rainbow animal costume from the school theater and just wore it everywhere, lived in the old oak tree in the recess yard. Some kids said he hid up in the branches, watching us through gaps in the leaves. The darker kids, the ones whose parents let them watch whatever they wanted, said he lived inside the trunk, eating larvae, doing things to the ghost of Jason Hughes. Jason Hughes wasn't a legend, though. I want to be clear about that. He was just a kid, a nervous, sweet, kind of odd kid with these enormous glasses that were way too big for his face, like he'd grabbed the wrong pair off a shelf and nobody had ever corrected it. He drew constantly, fish, beetles, these incredibly detailed things that nobody except him thought were interesting. I remember one afternoon I came into class, wanting to use the new markers the teacher had bought, and Jason had used every single sheet of paper in the entire room, every sheet, just covered in fish. I was furious at him. I don't know why I was so furious. He wasn't doing anything wrong. He was just drawing. Nobody liked him much. I didn't either, and I still don't fully understand why. He never did anything to anyone. He was just fretful and quiet and a little too stuck in his own head, the kind of kid that other kids can smell somehow and decide to leave alone. He disappeared one November evening when we were in second grade, just gone. A few days later, a teacher found his clothes folded at the base of the oak tree in the schoolyard, and the principal called an assembly, made it sound very calm and orderly, like the clothes had been neatly laundered before being left there. My dad was a cop. He had this habit, still does, honestly, of telling his kids things they shouldn't know. I think it was his way of getting it out of his own head, passing the weight along without meaning to. He told me the clothes weren't folded. He told me they were filthy, worse than filthy, soaked through with things I won't describe here, and if you're listening to this late at night, trust me, you're better off not knowing. He told me not to repeat it. I never did. Not because I was keeping a secret, but because saying it out loud felt like it would make it more real, and I couldn't afford for it to be more real. That's why I hated Muppet Man. You couldn't say the name without some kid, always some specific kind of kid, the ones who liked seeing other kids flinch, saying Jason's name right after. A call and response, a schoolyard chant. Muppet Man and Jason Hughes over and over, until I wanted to press my hands over both ears and scream. It didn't help that the whole school knew Jason had been my neighbor, and that my dad was a cop. Those two facts together made me an object of fascination for a few weeks, and then when the fascination wore off, something worse replaced it. The kids whose parents my dad had arrested, and there were a couple of them in my class, had been waiting for an excuse. I became the easiest target available. I didn't mind as much as I probably should have. I was fine with being alone. I spent every recess reading under the oak tree, and sometimes, without really deciding to, I'd read out loud, quietly, like I was reading to someone who was sitting next to me but not quite visible. Penance, maybe, for the markers, for not being nicer when I had the chance. I came to school late one morning in February. I don't remember why. I just remember walking across the empty recess yard alone, everyone else already inside, and the way the yard felt that morning. February is ugly where I grew up. The sky goes steel-colored and stays that way from morning to night, and all the plants die back, and the trees go skeletal except for these thick colonies of mistletoe that clump in the branches like something parasitic and dark. It looks like the world ran out of effort, gave up on color entirely that morning. The yard was completely still, not just quiet, still. The kind of stillness that makes your ears ring. I remember my footsteps sounded too loud on the pavement, and I kept wanting to slow down, step more carefully, like the ground was thinner than it looked, and I was afraid of what was underneath it. I had to walk past the oak tree. I always did. It was right in the middle of the yard, unavoidable. I slowed down when I got close because something about it stopped me. The bark was dark and wet-looking, almost reflective, and the branches spread out against the gray sky in all directions, bare and intricate. The mistletoe was everywhere, thick enough that it almost replaced the missing leaves, dark clumps of it, crowding every branch. And then I noticed the mistletoe was moving. I stood there and stared at it, told myself it was the wind. There wasn't any wind. The cold air was completely flat and still. But the mistletoe was rustling, shifting in a slow, rippling wave, like something was moving through it. Then I saw the color. Flashes of it, bright and wrong against the gray and black of the tree. Yellow, pink, blue, electric green. Moving in a long, loose shape through the branches, winding behind them and back out again. I couldn't understand what I was seeing. It didn't have a shape I recognized. And then it did. It had eyes, round and glassy, the color of fresh limes. They found me immediately, like they'd known exactly where I was the whole time. The thing pulled itself together. That's the only way I can describe it. Like it had been spread out and was now collecting itself into one form. And I saw the full shape of it. A costume. An animal costume in cartoon colors, fur in every neon shade imaginable, built around proportions that were wrong in a specific way, too long in the arms and the neck, like a person drawn by someone who'd only ever heard a person described. It smelled like old fabric and something underneath that. Something damp and closed up, like the inside of a trunk that hadn't been opened in years. "Hello," it said. The voice was cheerful and full, and came from somewhere inside the costume, like it was being projected. A cartoon voice. A children's show voice. Completely wrong for the gray February morning and the dead trees and my own pounding fear. "You're not real," I said. My voice came out smaller than I wanted it to. The lime green eyes fixed on me and didn't move. "I might even be realer than you." I stamped my foot. I don't know why. Some panicked instinct, like I was trying to wake myself up. The pavement held. Cold came up through the soles of my shoes. It moved down the trunk slowly, the way something moves when it doesn't need to hurry, when it knew I wasn't going anywhere. It slid down until those eyes were level with mine, and up close the fur was more overwhelming, more aggressively bright, more impossible to look away from. Everything else, the school building, the gray sky, the sand on the pavement, looked faded and thin in comparison, like a photograph left in the sun. "Only really real things," it said, "can hide themselves in plain sight. Real things like me and Jason Hughes." It extended one hand toward me, long, thin fingers in rainbow fur. Your friends call me Muppet Man. You can too. I ran. I ran all the way to the school building screaming, and I didn't stop until I was inside. I don't remember much of what happened after. The nurse, hiding under her desk, my dad not being the cop who showed up, watching through the window while officers walked the perimeter of the schoolyard, not knowing what they were looking for. One officer came in, grabbed my arm over the nurse's objections, and walked me back outside, straight to the tree. He pointed to a knot of neon pink fur caught in the bark and demanded to know if I'd put it there. I told him no. I told him what I'd seen. He walked me back inside without a word, and that night my parents drove me to my grandparents' house in San Diego. I was there for 3 weeks, long enough for the nightmares to get less vivid, long enough to start being able to sleep through the night without waking up convinced something was in the room. I came home on a Wednesday. I know because of my mom's calendar. She had this big glossy beagle calendar in the kitchen that always made me smile, and I remember looking at it when I came in and feeling like maybe things would be normal again. They fed me Burger King and ice cream cake, sent me to bed. When I pulled back my covers, I found tufts of neon fur on my pillow. I won't walk you through every incident. It went on for months. Fur in my dresser drawers, larvae, those white soft ones from the oak bark, on my arms while I read in the yard. Muppet Man's voice from my apricot tree one afternoon, close and unhurried, asking me to read Black Beauty aloud, while my mom was 10 feet away inside the house. I was terrified of him, but I was also, and I don't know how to explain this properly, I was also getting used to him, which might be the most frightening thing I've ever admitted out loud. Fear has a half-life. The more often something happens, the more your brain starts filing it under normal, even when it's not, even when it absolutely isn't. He asked me about Jason every time, told me Jason was lonely, that Jason's mom didn't want him back. And something about that, the smallness of it, the sadness of it, got to me in a way that the fear hadn't fully managed to. So, when I found the note on my windowsill at the end of May, folded construction paper with his offer written in bright marker, I did something that I still can't entirely explain. I went to my dad. I showed him the note. I begged until I cried. He spent a long time telling me I was making it up, and then something shifted in his face, something tired and resigned, and he agreed to take me. We walked to the school, 3 blocks, cold night, my hands wrapped around his. I led him through the hidden gate behind the cafeteria, the one all the kids knew about and no adult ever fixed. We crept along the edge of the buildings, staying in shadow until we could see the oak tree. "Wait here," I said. My dad looked exhausted. He stayed back. The tree looked healthy from a distance. Summer had come in and covered everything. The leaves were full, the mistletoe hidden, and from far away it looked like the eternal steady thing it had always been, visible from my bedroom window, solid and permanent. I walked toward it anyway. I stood at the base of the trunk and whispered, "Hello." The leaves rustled. "Hello," Muppet Man said. "Where's Jason?" Something came down the trunk slowly, and when it reached the ground and straightened up in front of me, I barely recognized it. The costume was wrecked. Mud caked the fur. Bare patches of dirty canvas showed through where the fur had worn away, and it took me a moment to realize those patches matched Those were the clumps he'd been leaving in my room for months. He'd been shedding himself piece by piece all year. His eyes caught the moonlight. "He's inside me," Muppet Man said. He brought one long, thin finger to his chin, pushed, and then he peeled his own face upward, the way a child peels back a Halloween mask, and underneath it was Jason Hughes. Those glasses, those enormous, ridiculous glasses on a face gone gray and fragile, the skin gone, the color of old paper, the whole thing so delicate looking that I was afraid to breathe wrong, like he'd been made of glass this whole time, and now it was visible. The costume crumpled to the ground in a heap, dull and flat and obviously completely empty. A thing that had never been alive. Jason's eye sockets swelled and then split apart with small, soft sounds, almost like paper tearing, and inside them something moved in colors I didn't have names for. Dark and living and full of points of light, the sand came up to meet my face. My dad was screaming somewhere behind me. Sirens in the distance, getting closer. I lay still and let it all happen around me. They put the costume in an evidence locker. They buried Jason a few weeks later, once they'd finished trying to figure out what had happened to him. My dad refused to tell me the findings. I didn't push. I've spent most of my life trying to let it fade, and mostly I've managed. You'd be surprised what you can normalize if enough ordinary time passes on top of it. But my dad has friends still on the force. They got together recently, couple of guys, retired or close to it, sitting around the way cops do and going over the old cases. The ones that stayed with them. Jason came up. "Did they ever get anyone for it?" my dad asked. "No," his friend said. "But the costume, you remember that crazy puppet costume? It's not in evidence anymore." My dad went quiet for a second. "What do you mean it's not there?" "Gone. No record of it being signed out. No record of it being disposed of. Just gone." I've thought about that every night since he told me. I thought about it last night too, lying in my bed, trying to decide if I was going to be able to sleep. And then this morning I got up, and I walked across my bedroom floor, and I felt it, that texture underfoot. Scratchy, unmistakable. I looked down, tufts of neon fur, scattered across the floor, like he'd walked every inch of the room while I slept. The part that stays with me isn't the fur, or the costume, or even Jason's face. It's the moment in the backyard when Muppet Man told me Jason was lonely, that his mom didn't want him. I was 7 years old, and I believed it, and some part of me felt sorry for him, for both of them, even while I was terrified. Was I wrong to? Or is that the only sane response to something that's sad, no matter what it is? We'd all known Dennis had less than a week, and we'd all braced ourselves for all the good that would do. We knew this was going to tear us apart and leave a ragged, gaping hole in all our lives. But that would have been it. It would have fit within our understanding of things. We could have assumed he went wherever we believed people go, and we could have held on to that, or at least pretended to. That would have been so much easier, so much less troubling than what actually happened. Dennis had been diagnosed with cancer 2 days after his 10th birthday, and it was all downhill from there. No upswing, no window for surgery. Every scan showed the same thing, the oily black webs, grown larger and denser, spreading through him like something that had been patient for a long time. and had finally decided to stop waiting. The fact that we were twins and had looked identical right up until the chemo started made everything worse in a way I could never fully explain to anyone who asked. There I was, right beside him every single day. A perfect image of what he used to look like before his hair fell out, before his color drained, before his cheeks started sinking inward toward his skull. An emaciated ghost constantly set against what he should have been, what he would have been, what I still was. And then finally the doctor shut the case, snuffed out the last thin threads of hope. Dennis most likely not last more than 4 days, a week at the most. So we set up camp in his room at the hospital. The walls were pea green and freckled with age. The kind of green that had probably seemed cheerful when someone chose it decades ago, and now just felt exhausted. The only light came in through the shutters in long, flat bars that stretched across the floor and stopped just short of Dennis's bed, like even the sunlight didn't want to reach him. The staff brought in a second bed for me, smaller and simpler. My parents slept in old wicker chairs, and I watched them age in real time over those 3 days. My dad's jaw getting tighter, my mom's eyes going somewhere distant that I couldn't follow. Dennis looked bad. There's no kinder way to put it. You could almost see his skull through his skin. We all wanted to talk to him, all wanted to make the most of whatever time was left, but he slept through most of the day, and when he did wake up, nobody could find the words. There were no right ones. There was this constant, unspoken fear that the moment any of us acknowledged what was happening, really acknowledged it, out loud, with sound, it would become real in a way it hadn't been yet, and that realness would knock all of us off whatever ledge we were balanced on. So there was silence. My mom forcing smiles that never reached her eyes. My dad staring at the window. Me watching Dennis breathe. The third day was when the heart monitor started breaking down. The steady beeping went frantic. Dennis began to shake, weakly, barely, and a dry, crackling sound came from somewhere in his mouth or his throat that I had never heard before and hope never to hear again. My mom exploded out of her chair and grabbed his shoulders and was pleading with him to stop it, to be all right, as though the right tone of voice could reverse it. My dad was at the door screaming down the hallway for help before I'd even fully processed what was happening. The doctors and nurses had been changing lately. Not the people themselves, but the way they moved in that room. Earlier in Dennis's stay, the resuscitations were frantic, desperate. Every movement had this quality of genuine urgency, like they personally needed him to survive. Now it was different, steadier, more methodical. These were people going through a checklist, ticking off procedures they were required to attempt. I understood it, in a detached way. I didn't blame them, but it sat in me like a stone. I don't think it would have made a difference either way. The cancer had finally tipped past some threshold his body couldn't come back from, and his system couldn't shoulder it anymore. They called it, offered their condolences, said they'd come back for the body when we were ready. The door clicked shut behind them. Just me, my mom, my dad, and Dennis's body. We inched closer to the bed. My mom broke first. Great, heaving sobs, the kind that come from somewhere deeper than crying. My dad pulled her into him and held on, not making sounds, but letting tears run freely down his face, jaw clenched, breath coming in sharp bursts through his teeth. I stood quietly and looked at Dennis's face. I stood there for a long time, and then, slowly, the full weight of it started to move through me. Not as one thing, but as a sequence of things. An unfolding list of losses that just kept going. I was never going to talk to him again. He was never going to make fun of me again. We were never going to eat dinner together again. Never going to ride to school together again. Never going to sit in the same classroom again. Pass notes, catch each other's eyes when something was funny. I'd spent my whole life assuming all of those things would happen, and had never once thought to appreciate them, and now they were all gone simultaneously. And it wasn't one loss. It was a million losses in the same second. A constant presence I had taken completely for granted was simply gone. And everything I would do for the rest of my life would be slightly wrong because of it. Soured by the certainty that he wasn't there and never would be, I was the first to see his lips quiver. "Mom, Dad," his lips are moving. My parents went still. My mom was still curled against my dad, face buried in his chest. They both looked down. His lips kept moving. My parents went quiet, holding back whatever hope was rising in them, probably telling themselves it was a nerve, some kind of involuntary muscle response. The body doing things bodies did, but it kept going. And then, in a voice so faint, it was like hearing something carried on the wind from very far away, dusty and hoarse and barely there, he said my name. Harry. My dad sprinted to the door, yelling for the nurses. My mom stumbled back from the bed with her hand over her mouth. The medical staff came back and went through the checklist and used the defibrillator and reached their verdict. "We're sorry. He's still dead, but I heard him talk," my dad said. His voice was very small. It could have been gas escaping, but a tiny scraping sound cut through the room. Everyone turned. It was coming from Dennis. "Harry, it's all so dark, so cold, so dark, and it's pulling down, pulling at my insides and taking me down." What followed was several hours that I can only describe from the outside, because from the inside I was barely functional. I was 11 years old. I hadn't eaten since the morning before, and the fluorescent light in that hospital was the kind that hums at a frequency that gets into your skull if you're under it long enough. My hands had started shaking at some point and hadn't stopped. I kept pressing them flat against my thighs, and they'd be still for a minute, and then start again. The nurses came back. These weren't the measured checklist movements from before. You could see on their faces that they didn't know what they were dealing with, and that scared them more than anything they'd prepared for. They went back to the defibrillator, listening, rechecking again. One of them was mumbling under her breath, "Doesn't make sense, doesn't make sense." After about 10 minutes, they all stepped back. "Nothing is happening," one of the doctors said. My mom had asked what was happening, screamed it, and he was answering her as carefully as he could. "We try to pump in oxygen and it does nothing. There's no pulse, and we can't induce one for more than a second or two. His body temperature is down 3 degrees. He is deceased." "But we heard him," I said. "I know, but he's dead." And then Dennis spoke again, and everyone went quiet. "Please, Harry, where are you?" I walked to his side. I want to tell you I wasn't suddenly scared that something brave took over, but I was terrified. This was wrong in a way that bypassed understanding and went straight to something older in me. Some animal part that knew what dead looked like and knew this was wrong. I wanted to run. I wanted him to just be gone so I could cry and be done with it. But I kept walking, and I put my hand on his. Bony and cold and clearly, obviously dead, the fingers stiffening at odd angles already. And I said, "I'm here. I can see gray. A little bit of gray, but it's so far away. I don't just see it, I feel it. I feel it, and I never knew something could be so far away. I'm already so far down, but I need to go so much further to get to the gray." I was the only one Dennis seemed to be aware of. My parents figured that out gradually and started leaving the room in stretches, which I understood, but which also made me feel like I was on a ship with the water rising and everyone else had already found a lifeboat. Different doctors rotated through. A technician came. They moved Dennis on a stretcher at some point to get him to equipment they couldn't bring to the room, and I had to walk alongside him with my hand on his because the moment I let go, he stopped answering. Eventually, they got desperate enough to put him in an fMRI. A corpse, fully prepped, slid into a machine built for the living. The technician stared at the monitors for a long time before he said anything. "I think we've got something." My mom looked like she'd been awake for 3 days, because she had. "Please just tell us what's happening." "Look, this scan tracks blood flow in the brain. None of the blood is moving. That's consistent with no pulse. But there's something else happening. Something the machine is only just picking up. Some kind of activity clustered around the regions that control movement. Everything else is completely dark. He's obviously conscious. He's using complete sentences. But it's like whatever is doing the thinking is somewhere else. Still connected to the parts that handle speech, but the source of it is elsewhere." "That's exactly right." The voice came from behind us. An old man in a gray business suit stood near the door. Silver beard, well trimmed. Everything about him was precise and unhurried. A strange contrast to the chaos that had been building in that hospital for hours. "Who are you?" the technician asked. "Daniel Coates." He handed over a crisp card. "I'm with the Orpheus Institute. We're a semi-private medical research organization. We've dealt with cases similar to this one. The hospital president has already agreed to let us proceed." Men in white scrubs, with a logo I didn't recognize, had materialized behind him, moving toward the technician with folders. More of them took Dennis back onto a stretcher. My parents protested. My dad's voice was husky with held-back tears when he asked what they thought they were doing. Coates stopped and looked at all 3 of us in turn, carefully, before answering. "We're not performing surgery. We want nothing more than to understand what is happening to your son. This sort of situation has occurred before. Your son is conscious, and he will apparently only speak to his brother. We want Harry to act as the point of contact, to ask Dennis our questions. We believe this works best if they're alone together. We have the room wired. We'll hear everything." My dad was quiet for a moment. Then, in a voice I had never heard from him before, small and staggered, like each word cost something. "Do you think he might come back? I know even if he does, it won't be for long, but..." I'd really like him back, for however long. I didn't say enough. I wasn't big enough to say the things we had to say to each other. Coans looked at him for a moment. If such a thing is possible, I swear we will do everything in our power to make it happen. We've prepared a waiting room for you both. My parents shuffled down the corridor. My mom folded into my dad's side. My dad, throwing, looks back over his shoulder at me every few steps, like he was afraid I'd disappear. Then they were gone around the corner, and I felt Coanus's hand come down on my shoulder, and he crouched down to get closer to my eye level. I know this is very hard on you, but do you think you're up to a quick history lesson? I didn't answer properly, but some thread of curiosity made it through the shock, and I nodded. One of the most significant moments in human history, he said, was the moon landing. And what makes it so important isn't even the achievement itself. It's that we had contact with them the entire time they were up there. Radio signals, voices, a constant connection. Do you think the moon landing would have been what it was if we'd had nothing? If they'd just gone up and we'd never heard from them again? I said I didn't know. The people in Houston knew they might not get the astronauts back. It was a real possibility that they'd be stranded up there and die. But they still went. And what mattered, more than the return, more than the triumph, was that connection. Having men up there to describe the soil, to explain what it felt like to move in that gravity, to tell us what the earth looked like from a place no human had ever stood. That contact with the unknown was worth everything. His hand tightened slightly on my shoulder. We believe Dennis is in a very strange place, a place humanity would benefit from understanding. You are Houston. Your brother is the astronaut. He handed me a laminated card. Here are topics to focus on, questions to ask. Most importantly, keep him talking. Stop for more than 5 seconds and you may lose him. He ushered me into the operating theater and closed the door. The room was cold and very still, the kind of stillness that has its own sound, a faint metallic ringing from the racks of instruments. Dennis was on the operating table, and even in the short time since I'd last been beside him, the change was visible. Whatever color the dying had left in him was gone. He'd moved from the sickly white of illness to something else entirely, the flat, gray-tinged shade of something that was no longer in the process of anything. I looked at the laminated card. General principles: try to keep your loved one unaware of their deceased state. Past experience suggests the shock may cause disconnection. Maintain constant conversation. This has been shown to help maintain the connection. Do not ask leading questions regarding religious belief. First step: ask your loved one to describe their experiences and surroundings. Encourage them to be as specific as. Dennis gasped. Harry. Yes, I said. I took his hand. It was ice cold, the fingers already locking at wrong angles. I'm here. I got to the gray, to the ground, came down easy like a leaf. Cold. I'm standing there now. Can you describe where you are? It's still gray, but it's more real now. Solid. Gray sand underneath, gray ocean behind me, gray clouds above. Don't remember going through the clouds, but they're there now. The clouds, they're screaming. An ocean. Can you see anything in the ocean? He took in a long, slow breath that served no biological purpose. Far away, The horizon, it gets dark. A dark, hungry line where even the clouds stop, where everything stops. The darkness is moving, clawing, miles and miles of it, alive and angry. Can't go that way. Can't go toward it. I lost the thread then. The perspective hit me all at once. What I didn't understand, what I couldn't possibly understand, the fact that my brother was dead and lying on a metal table, and I was holding his hand, and he was describing somewhere. I broke. I pressed my face against his ribs. Bare and ice cold, cold the way meat is cold when it comes straight out of the fridge, and I dug my fingers around his and kept squeezing. Dennis, please come back. Wherever you are, just get back here. Harry, are you crying? It's hard to tell. So much here already sounds like crying. His words hit somewhere deep enough to stall my sobs. I straightened up and looked at him. I can't come back. No getting back. Like spilling something on the ground. No getting it all back inside and right again. I forced myself to keep going. What's in the other direction? Away from the ocean? That's the way I have to go. If I try to swim, the darkness will tear me apart, shred away everything until only the pain is left, and toss that into the clouds. Into the clouds, and I'll scream. Tell me what's in the other direction, Dennis. Just the sand. Gray sand, on and on. Not many bad things yet. Not many bad things to see yet. There'll be more when I get where I'm going. I'm going to start walking now. Where are you meant to be going? I don't know what it's called. Just toward the center. The center of this place. Maybe the center of everything. I was gripping the edge of the operating table with my free hand hard enough that my knuckles ached. Why do you have to go? I don't have to. Nobody has to. It's like, you don't have to shake someone's hand when they put it out, but it would feel wrong not to. It's what you're supposed to do, and there's no other good option. You don't want to just stand still. What happens when you stand still? There was a long pause. I almost called out his name. A few days ago, he said, I passed a woman. A few days? My grip tightened on the table edge. You've been dead for less than a day. I passed her a few days ago, he continued, as though I hadn't spoken. She didn't reach the center. She just sat down, started going her own way. She's pulled one side of her rib cage out, and it's all stretched, spreading up to her left, so high, stretching out the arm, grabbing its corner. Most of her skin started to go hard and flaky, like old wood or crumbling stone. I can see her whole self. She was a musician, thought of her life like a song. It repeated itself sometimes, some bad notes here and there, but it was pulling itself together, and she was reaching the chorus, and then it ended. It was over so fast, and she can't accept it. She's picked a sharp rock up off the ground, and she's scraping it past her ribs like a huge harp. Angry, trying to make music, keep the song going, but it's an awful sound, just sawing bone, and it's never going to replace what should have come next. She's already grown into the ground. She's going to be there forever, trying to make the music she missed. I had nothing to say to that. I went quiet and assumed he'd keep talking. He didn't. Dennis? Dennis. Silence. I slammed my fist against his chest. Dennis, come back. A growl tore out of his mouth, and his entire frame lurched upward. I stumbled back and went down hard, crashing into a shelf of surgical instruments, metal raining down around me on the floor. I scrambled back up, before I'd even fully registered falling, and bent over the operating table to look at him. I took his hand again. "Harry," he said, and relief flooded through me so completely that I nearly sat down on the floor again. It's been so long. So long, it's been years. It hasn't been a day. I've been walking for years, and it keeps getting worse. What keeps getting worse? It gets worse closer to the center. There are so many people now. Thousands, tens of thousands, all walking the same direction, and more like the woman with the harp. So many more of them, stuck in place, trying to undo what happened, furious about what happened, rooted to the ground, calling out the names of people they think are responsible for putting them there. Some of them find each other. When they get hard and crackly, like old statues, they start to grow together, start to share their pain. Sometimes there are mountains of them, entire landscapes made of people who couldn't stop being angry about how unfair it was. He paused. I'm still walking. Where are you going? The center. I'm getting close now. The clouds are curving. All of them, curving and spiraling inward, all twisting down toward the same point. Please, stop walking. Come back. Can't. No coming back. Besides, I have to keep moving. Standing still. Doing something strange. It's the quickest way to get the walkers to notice you. My stomach dropped. What are the walkers? Started seeing them more as I got closer. They're everywhere now. They walk on 3 legs, like stilts, long and spindly, covered in black shells, sharp ones, like thorns. The top part, the body, it's different, more exact, almost designed looking, like a sculpture or a chess piece. When they notice you, they come over and stop with you between their legs, and you have to look up at the holes in the underside, and that's when the tendrils come down, red, winding tendrils with these tiny hairs on them, and they start curling and swinging around you. You almost don't mind at first. You've been walking through gray and black for years, and the tendrils are red, and it's beautiful. But then they touch you, and everything bad that ever happened to you, every terrible thing you ever felt, it all rises up at once, drowning you. All the pain you ever buried comes out through your skin, and the walkers feed on it. They taste it with those tendrils. They love the taste of the things that shouldn't have happened. They love the taste of misery. Eventually, they get full and move on, and you get up and keep walking. Jesus, Dennis, it's fine, it's terrible, but you get perspective here. Those things are scary to think about, but they're nothing next to what's at the center. They're bottom feeders. If they're like sea urchins, then whatever's at the center is like something at the bottom of the ocean that's too big and too deep to ever come to the surface. You've never talked like this before. You don't always need to have learned a word to know something here. This place is less interested in causes and effects, and 2 + 2 = 4. Its job isn't to make sense. What is its job? I don't know. Maybe I'll find out at the center. He went quiet again. I waited. Longer than I should have. And part of me, the part that had been awake for going on 30-some hours, the part that was 11 years old, and hadn't eaten and had been holding a dead hand for most of the afternoon, that part didn't want to pull him back. Didn't want to hear any more of this, but I called his name, and he came back. Shit, Dennis said. Shit, I see it now. I see the center. His hand began to close around mine, not the way hands close when someone grabs for you, slowly, inevitably, like a trap closing in slow motion. I felt the bones in my fingers compress and tried to pull back but couldn't move inside that grip. It's inside this huge thing like a beehive, floating above the ground, gray, covered with streaks and ridges, like it was liquid once and hardened, or like it's made of web. So big, Harry. I've never seen anything that big. All the clouds are swirling down into a hole at the top of it, still screaming. Hundreds of holes, ragged and pitch black on the inside. Bigger than cities. Everyone's heading toward it, thousands and thousands, swarming under it, pushing up against each other to climb the bridges. Messy bridges from the ground up to the holes, right into the pitch black. The center's in there. Harry, I'm here. Please, my voice was very small. You can't go in. There's nothing good in there. I knew this not because of the description, though the description was enough, but as something deeper than knowing. The way you know certain things are true, before you can explain why they're true. This was real and fundamental, as much a part of everything as the sun and the moon and birth. And it was wrong. Dripping with wrongness all the way to its core. Where else is there to go? I'm at one of the bridges. Please, you can come back. No, that'd be like going back into the womb. Can't be done. This is what's next. Oh, what? What is it? Oh, God. I'm starting to feel something. I think the center's doing it. I'm getting bitter. Every mean thing. Every spiteful thing. Everything angry in me is swelling, spreading out, and smothering the rest. I'm so mad, Harry. I'm getting so much smaller, and my hate is getting so much bigger. His hand tightened, and I cried out. Why was it me? Why was it me and not you? What did you do that I didn't? What did I do that you didn't? I'm sorry. I'm so sorry. I hate you. His voice had changed completely. Still quiet, but rabid. Each word soaked through with something I had never heard from him before. Not even in our worst arguments. Still able to stand, still able to run, still able to breathe. I fucking hate you. I was hurting all the time, and you just stood there feeling sorry for me. You couldn't feel any of it. Just waiting to see me die, so you could go off and do everything I never would. I was screaming for someone to come in. I'd nearly pulled Dennis off the table. His torso hung over the edge, held straight by whatever force was allowing him to do any of this. His eyes were still completely dead. Still had been the whole time. And then he went limp, his hand released. His back sagged, and he slid off the table and hit the floor. He'd broken 3 of my fingers, and the pain was coming in from a distance, delayed by shock. I dropped to my knees beside him and slapped his face and called his name and looked for anything. He gasped, fainter than before. So faint I had to press my ear close to hear it. Oh no, oh Jesus. I'm inside, and it's so much worse than I thought. It's beyond worse. So far past the worst I thought something could be. Dennis, please tell me what you see. The man said if you kept talking you might stay. Please just tell me. It's the center. It's so big. Big and floating above me. And it's so much bigger than the hive, so much bigger than what it's inside. The whole inside is so much bigger. It's gray, always gray. Gray and cracked like stone, all over. Endless miles of it. His voice had changed again. Smaller, younger. The rage had drained completely, and what was left was afraid. It's hurting me, Harry. It's hurting me more than I've ever been hurt, and it hasn't even noticed me. I know, Dennis, I know. Just keep talking, just keep. So big, he said, and his voice was wobbling and breaking. Its fingers are bigger than skyscrapers, and it has so many of them. Millions. And ribs, the body is all ribs. Or are they just fingers all folded up? I don't know, but there are so many and they're so big. And the masks, Jesus, the masks. What masks? The masks, its faces, bigger than countries, all different. Some have eyes that are perfect circles. Some have huge pointy holes where the mouths should be. Some are blank, and some have 8 eye holes, and some look exactly like human faces. Perfect. Human faces, with deep, dark, hollow eyes. All of them, the inside of all of them is so dark, a living dark, a pulsing dark, pulsing all together. And it's so huge, and you can feel it pressing in on everything, filling the air, and from inside you can feel the bad in you reaching out toward it. Out toward it like a baby reaching out for its mother. And Harry, he was breathing in and out, faster and faster, shallow, terrified breaths, instinct overriding the fact that he had no need for air anymore. Dennis, talk to me. What is it? What is it? It's not the devil, he said. No, that's what I thought at first, but it's not. It's more like God. It's like if God hated everything. His breathing kept climbing. Oh, Jesus, it sees me. Please, please promise me one thing, just one thing, anything. What is it? Please? And then he went quiet for a moment, the way someone goes quiet when they're deciding whether to say the thing they most need. To say, don't ever die. One last breath rolled out of him. I tried everything I could think of, in the kind of desperate burst of energy that doesn't think, just moves. I hit him, shook him, called his name, pressed my ear against him, and listened for anything. But he was gone this time. Really gone. Whatever had been maintaining that connection had finally released, and what was on the floor was just my brother's body, cold and still and finally done. I knelt there for a while. Don't ever die. I don't know how those words found the specific place in me where they landed, but they did, and I have never been able to dig them out. The next few hours were a blur. Men in white scrubs came in and pulled me away from the body, gently but firmly, and I let them because I had nothing left to resist with. My hand was seen to and put in a cast and sling. 3 fractures, clean ones. Daniel Coance sat me down in a white room and asked me questions for a long time. He called it a conversation, but it was an interrogation, warm and careful, conducted by a man who understood exactly how to be kind when kindness was useful. He wanted to know if I'd experienced any visions, any strong sensations, whether I believed Dennis had been telling the truth, whether I could account for the ways Dennis had been speaking differently at the end. I was running on fumes and pain and answered everything honestly because I didn't have the energy for anything else. At the end, Coance made me memorize a phone number, made me sign confidentiality forms, made it clear in the warmest possible way that none of this could leave the hospital. Then he and his people left, and my parents and I took a taxi home and didn't talk, and the next morning we had a wordless breakfast with an extra chair at the table. The years moved the way years do, faster than you expect, and in the wrong direction. The whole experience became something I carried rather than thought about. Something my mind would occasionally steer back toward in the small hours before I pushed it away. The fact that Dennis was gone was always worse than the manner of his going. However wrong and frightening that manner had been, you grieve the person, you grieve the loss. The rest is just noise around a very simple absence. But lately I've been having a dream. It started off fragmented, pieces, impressions, nothing solid. But every few nights it came back, and each time it was longer and more complete, filling in like a photograph developing. It always starts the same way. Me and Dennis, both of us kids again, on a green hill on a bright clear day. Crisp air. The kind of afternoon that feels like it was specifically designed to be remembered fondly. I can't recall most of the words, but the shape of it is always the same. He's bragging, showing off, telling me that Dad loves him more, that he's better than me, that he's going to keep being better for as long as he lives. And I get so angry. Angrier than I ever got at him in real life, angrier than I knew I could get. I find a rock without looking for it, and I pick it up, and I go at him with it. I knock him over and keep going, until his skin is torn and swollen and you can see parts of his skull. He shoves me off and runs, and I follow, and I chase him so far that eventually he runs into a mountain pass I hadn't seen before, a long dark range extending to either side as far as I can see, clouds above it, heavy and dark and low. I always stop at the entrance to the pass. The job feels done, and then I start to leave my body, surging forward without legs, just moving, a nameless observer, gliding like a ghost through the gap in the mountains and out the other side. The country beyond is sunless and gray, dry gray soil, gray sky, no light that comes from anywhere specific. He runs until he falls, and then he screams at me from the ground, telling me what I cost him, telling me he hates me for driving him here. He rages for a long time. And then someone else comes. Sometimes a man, sometimes a woman. Old, young, I can never tell. They say the same thing, that they were driven past the mountains or wandered through by mistake and can't find their way back. Dennis always answers the same way. Then let's suffer together. Let's hurt together. And this person grabs onto him, and he grabs back, and they are joined by another. And the trickle becomes a flood, and they all clasp together and pile up, a writhing mass of them climbing toward the clouds. And then there's a sound, massive and grinding, a shifting from somewhere deep, and the mass begins to rearrange. Deep canyons form in the flesh of it, outlining a face, huge and horrible and full of a rage that isn't one person's rage, but everyone's, all the way back to the first person who ever cursed anyone, all the way back to the first grievance, that oldest anger still in there at the core. It pulls itself forward on enormous limbs made of the bitter and the despairing. It moves slowly, the way things that are very large move slowly, but it moves with certainty, and it's heading for the mountain range, heading back toward the bright place. Every time, it gets right up to the mountains. Then I wake up. I've told this story because I think it matters that people know it, not the dream, though I think the dream matters too, but what Dennis said. What he described, the gray shore and the dark ocean, the woman scraping her ribs like a harp, the walkers, the center, the thing inside it with its faces bigger than countries. I've had a long time to sit with all of it, and the conclusion I keep coming back to is the same one I reached in that hospital room when I was 11, holding my dead brother's hand and listening to him walk towards something I didn't have a name for. It was true. All of it. I knew it. Then the way you know the world is round even though the ground feels flat. It doesn't matter how little sense it makes. It's the truth. And I think something is coming. Something that has been building for a very long time, feeding on the bitter and the stuck and the despairing, growing large enough to move, large enough to start heading somewhere. I think when it gets here, the living will be no better off than the dead. Dennis asked me not to be angry on his behalf. He never actually said that, but I know now that's what he would have wanted if he'd had more time to think about what to say at the end. If you were me, and those were the last words someone gave you, please don't ever die, how would you choose to spend the time in between? I've said that to myself maybe 100 times since everything started. Not out loud, never out loud. But in that quiet part of my head where I keep the things I can't tell anyone, I say it the way you'd say something you're still trying to make sense of. Like if I repeat it enough times, it'll start to feel normal. It hasn't yet. Tom and I have been best friends since we were 5 years old. I know that's a thing people say, best friends since we were kids. And it usually means they grew up on the same street and drifted apart by middle school. That's not what this is. What Tom and I have is the kind of friendship that doesn't make logical sense. We came from completely different worlds. His mom drank herself to sleep most nights. His dad was a name on a birth certificate and nothing else. My parents were strict in that loving, suffocating way that meant there were rules for everything, including who I spent time with. We had no business being friends. But kindergarten doesn't care about any of that. You sit next to someone at the craft table and you just start talking, and 23 years later, you still haven't stopped. My parents noticed the friendship before they said anything about it. I could tell by the way they'd glance at each other across the dinner table when I mentioned Tom's name. That particular silence between two people who are deciding whether to say something. They weren't worried about Tom himself. Not really. He was always polite when he came over, always said please and thank you, always asked if he could help carry dishes in from the table. What bothered them was the house he went home to, the mother who smelled like wine at 3 in the afternoon. When she came to pick him up from school, the way Tom would get very quiet and very still on Sunday evenings. When the weekend was ending and going home became unavoidable. By the time we hit 8th grade, my parents had accepted it. Not happily, accepted it the way you accept weather. They kept their eye on us. But they stopped trying to separate us because I think they understood by then that it wouldn't work. High school made things easier in some ways. We weren't just kids playing together anymore. We were a known quantity, Tom and me, Tom and me. Teachers said our names like that, one word. People stopped questioning it and just filed it away as a fact about the world. The way you file away which lunch table belongs to which group. I loved everything about him. I know how that sounds. I mean it the way you mean it about a person who's been woven into the fabric of your days for so long that removing them would leave a hole shaped exactly like them. I loved the way he twitched his nose right before he sneezed, the way he'd rock forward on the balls of his feet when he was excited about something, like his whole body couldn't contain whatever he was about to say. Brown curly hair that never sat right, freckles dusting his cheeks that darkened in summer. He was the first person I saw every morning, and the last voice I heard every night. That was just how it was. Those feelings didn't change when the murders started happening. I want to be careful about how I say this next part, not careful in the way that means I'm hiding something. Careful in the way that means I want you to understand it correctly, because I've found that if I say it too plainly, people don't actually hear it. They assume they misunderstood. David was the first person to die. He was a year ahead of us. Big guy, not athletic big, just solid and mean in the way that some boys are when they've been told they're important their whole lives. He'd been making Tom's life miserable for about 3 years. It wasn't dramatic bullying. It was the grinding, daily kind, the kind that leaves no marks. A shoulder in the hallway, a lunch tray nudged off a table. Comments quiet enough that only Tom could hear them. Tom never fought back. Tom never told anyone. He just absorbed it with that particular stillness of his, the one that meant he was somewhere else in his head. The afternoon it escalated. I happened to be cutting through the parking lot when I heard it. The sound of someone getting hit, flat and wrong, the way sounds are when something that shouldn't happen is happening. I turned and there was David, and there was Tom, and Tom's head had snapped sideways from the force of it. I remember the smell of the parking lot, hot asphalt and exhaust and someone's fast food. This bizarre, mundane smell underneath something terrible. I started screaming. Not words, just volume. David looked at me the way people look when they've been caught. That half-second of calculation, and then he walked off like nothing had happened. Tom let me drag him to the nurse's office. He sat in that plastic chair with his hands in his lap, very still, while the nurse packed his eye with ice and asked him questions. He answered in single syllables. He wasn't scared. He wasn't angry. He was somewhere I couldn't reach. When we were done, he said he was going home, and he left. No goodbye, no see you tomorrow, just gone. The next morning, David was found dead at the park on the east side of town. He'd been stabbed multiple times in the stomach. The police said he'd been there a while before anyone found him. Long enough that it had rained and the scene was a mess. Even before the responding, officers made it worse by walking through it without thinking. Our town's police department was built for noise complaints and the occasional DUI. They had no idea how to process what they were looking at. There were rumors at school. Everyone knew what David had done to Tom in that parking lot. For about a week, people looked at Tom differently in the hallways, not accusing him out loud, just that shift in the eyes, that slight step to the side when he walked past. But David had enemies all over town. The list of people who had reason to hate him was long, and Tom was just one name on it. Tom and I never talked about David. I want you to sit with that for a second. Best friends, 17 years deep in a friendship, and we just didn't talk about it. We went back to normal. Lunch at the usual table, walking home the same route, texting back and forth at night about nothing. The subject of David simply ceased to exist between us. I was fine with that. We'd always understood each other without words. Some things don't need to be said to be understood. The case went nowhere. The detective assigned to it retired the following spring. People moved on. A few months passed. Winter settled in, then softened. Tom and I went to movies, did homework together, argued about music. Life was normal. I'd almost convinced myself that normal was permanent. Then Stephanie. She went to our school, a year below us. Pretty in that brittle way that reads as confidence until you get close enough to see the anxiety underneath it. She'd hated me since 7th grade, when I was cast in the school play over her. That's what started it. A middle school audition. And she'd never let it go. She'd spent years taking small, precise shots at me. Comments in the hallway. Rumors to mutual friends. Nothing big enough to escalate. Just a constant, low-level static that I'd learned to tune out. Tom couldn't stand it. He never said much. Tom rarely said much, but I'd catch him watching her across the cafeteria with an expression I didn't like to look at too closely. Stephanie was found behind a bar on the south side of town. A dumpster, which felt cruel in a way that the newspaper didn't say out loud, but everyone thought. She'd been stabbed once, precisely, in the neck. Whoever did it knew exactly what they were doing. It was over fast. The police investigated again. They found nothing again, and this time the rumors had more shape to them. People talked about Tom the way people talk about someone they've already decided is guilty and are just waiting for the evidence to catch up. 2 people who'd made his life difficult. 2 bodies. The math felt obvious to everyone. He glanced at me across the lunch table after that a few times. Opened his mouth like he was going to say something, then looked down at his food. I watched it happen and waited. He never found the words. I didn't need him to. I already knew. Lester was the 3rd. The town drunk! Everyone knew him. Nobody liked him. He had a habit of following women to their cars after last call, of shouting things from his porch that made people cross the street. The town was genuinely better without him, and I don't think I'm alone in having thought that even before he died. Tom had no connection to Lester. That's what made it different. The police noticed that too. They brought Tom in for questioning at the station, sat him in a room with a detective who'd driven in from the county seat and asked him questions for 2 hours. I gave Tom an alibi. I told the police that Tom and I had gone to see a movie in the town over that night. I pulled the ticket stubs out of my jacket pocket. 2 stubs, same showing, same date. The detective looked at them, looked at me. I held his gaze the way I'd learned to hold people's gaze since I was small, the way that reads as trustworthy. Good kid, good family, no reason to lie. The stubs were from a movie I'd taken my little sister to see. Tom was released. The detective assured the school, in a brief statement, that Tom was not a suspect. Kids still avoided him. They'd already made up their minds, and an official statement wasn't going to undo that. Tom had been an outsider his whole life. This was just a colder version of the same thing. A few nights after the questioning, I couldn't sleep. I kept lying there in the dark, listening to the house sense us, running the same thoughts in circles. Around 2 in the morning, I got up, pulled on a sweatshirt, and let myself out the side door. The walk to Tom's house took 20 minutes. His neighborhood was quiet at that hour. A dog barked somewhere on the next block, then stopped. The air was cold enough that I could see my breath, cold enough that my nose went numb before I was halfway there. I walked with my hands in my pockets and didn't think too hard about what I was going to say. I tapped on his window. 3 knocks, soft. He appeared before I'd even dropped my hand, like he'd been sitting there in the dark waiting. He looked at me for a second without expression, then disappeared inside. A minute later, his back door opened, and we settled onto the porch steps, shoulders almost touching, talking low. The yard smelled like mud and dead leaves. Somewhere nearby, there was a wind chime, going slowly. The cold had that particular quality that late autumn cold gets. Not sharp, just settled, like it intended to stay. "This doesn't change anything between us," I said. I could feel him sitting very still beside me. "You're still my best friend. Everything is the same." He shook his head. "Not angry, just tired." "You know that's not true. This can't keep going." "Why not?" The question came out flatter than I meant it to. "The cops have nothing. They're not going to find anything. People can say whatever they want. Without evidence, it doesn't matter. Something will slip." His voice was quiet and certain in a way that was harder to argue with than anger would have been. Eventually, something always does. I sat with that for a moment. The wind chime moved again. A car passed somewhere distant. I could feel the cold through my jeans, through the concrete of the step, working its way up through my bones. "Fine," I said finally. "You're right. I'll be more careful." He turned to look at me, more careful. "If there's a next time," I corrected. "If people leave us alone, there won't be." A long pause. "You don't have to do this," he said. "You don't have to protect me." I looked at him. The freckles faded in the dark, the curl of his hair, the way he held himself like he was bracing for something that had already happened, and I said, "I know, but I'm going to anyway." I stood up and shoved my hands back into my pockets. We said goodbye quietly, and he climbed back through his window, turned once to whisper something I'd already heard 100 ways without words. "Be careful. Don't forget, please." I started walking home. The night was quiet. My breath clouded in front of me and disappeared. I walked the long way, the route that goes past the park where David was found, and I didn't think about that, not specifically. I thought about Tom, about the way he'd looked at me on the back steps, that exhausted, worried look that meant he cared more about what happened to me than about anything that had happened to him. My right hand was in my pocket. I traced the edge of the blade the way you trace a familiar scar, not thinking about it, just the habit of it. The metal was cold. It always took a while to warm. Life's tough when your best friend's a serial killer. Honestly, I don't know how Tom does it. I've thought about that night on the porch a lot since then. The part where he said, "You don't have to protect me," because he meant it. He genuinely meant it. And he had no idea how wrong he was. He had no idea what I'd already done, what I was already willing to do again. Tom sees the best version of everyone. It's his worst quality and his best one at the same time. So, I want to ask you something, and I want you to actually think about it. At what point does protecting someone become something else? When does it stop being love and start being. I don't know, something without a clean name, because I never once felt like I had a choice. Every single time, it felt like the only possible thing to do. Did it feel that way to you, or did you see it coming long before I admitted it to myself? The first thing I noticed, before I even reached the front door, was that the welcome mat was gone. I stood there on the porch for a second, staring at the bare concrete where it used to be, a stupid thing to fixate on. The house behind me smelled like something had been rotting inside it for years. I could already tell that from the driveway, and I was standing there thinking about a welcome mat. But that mat had been there my entire childhood. My mother had picked it out herself, tan and brown, with a little sunflower pattern along the edge, and she'd been meticulous about keeping it clean. Shake it out every Sunday, she used to say. Don't track the outside world in with you. I don't know when she stopped caring about that. I don't know exactly when she stopped caring about a lot of things. That's one of the harder parts of growing apart from someone. The deterioration happens in the gaps between your visits. In all the days you weren't there to see it. You show up and the mat is gone, and you realize you missed the whole story of how it disappeared. I tightened the mask over my nose and mouth and pushed the door open. It took my full body weight to move it. Something was piled against the other side. Something dense and compacted, and I had to lean in and shove until I'd created just enough of a gap to angle myself through sideways. The smell hit me before I was fully inside, thick and wet and layered, the kind of smell that coats the inside of your nose and stays there. Rotting food, old paper, something sour underneath it all that I didn't want to identify. I breathed through my mouth and stood very still and made myself look at what my mother had been living in. The floor was invisible, completely covered wall to wall, under a shifting landscape of crumpled paper and plastic bags and things I couldn't immediately name. The kitchen counter, which I remembered as perpetually clear and wiped down, had disappeared under stacked plates and cardboard boxes and what looked like bags of garbage she'd never taken out. Brown and black patches of something soft spread across surfaces where fruit had been left so long it had started to dissolve. There were bones, chicken maybe, or something larger, scattered at irregular intervals, still carrying scraps of gray, dried meat. And over all of it, coating the air itself, was the sound, the buzzing. I'd forgotten how loud it was, or maybe I'd spent years convincing myself I'd exaggerated it in memory. I hadn't. The flies were everywhere, hanging in loose clusters near the ceiling, orbiting the decomposing food, landing and lifting in that lazy, unhurried way that meant they had no reason to go anywhere. They owned this place. They'd been here longer than I had. I stood in the entryway for a long time, long enough that the smell started to settle into something I could almost tolerate. Then I went back to my car, sat in the driver's seat with the air conditioning on full, and stared at the house for a while longer. My mother had always lived like this. That's the part that people never quite understand when I try to explain it. They picture a person who was always chaotic, always neglectful, always willing to let things accumulate and decay. That wasn't who she was. The woman I grew up with ironed her pillowcases, She kept a running inventory of the pantry on a notepad stuck to the refrigerator with a little magnet shaped like a pineapple. She had a system for everything, for the mail, for the shoes by the door, for which cleaning products to use on which surfaces. Order wasn't just a preference for her. It was how she held herself together. My father died when I was 19, just as I was leaving for college, and something in her came undone. I didn't see it happen in real time. I was away, and she called when she needed to, and she sounded tired but fine, tired but fine, tired but fine, and I believed her because I wanted to. When I came home for winter break that first year, I walked into the house and stood exactly where I'd just been standing an hour ago, in that same entryway, and felt the floor shift under my feet. Papers everywhere. Dishes stacked in the sink and around the sink and on the floor next to the sink. Food left out. A smell, just beginning to build, not yet what it would become, but already wrong. She was embarrassed. She picked at the hem of her sweater and looked at the floor and said she'd been busy. She'd get to it. It wasn't as bad as it looked. I spent the whole month cleaning. She let me, mostly, but every time I threw something away, she'd wait until I was in another room and fish it back out again. She told me about it once, late at night, sitting at the kitchen table. She'd been crying, I think, or was close to it. She said she couldn't throw away anything your father touched. His coffee mug, the wrapper from a granola bar he'd opened and left on the counter the morning before he died. She'd brought his files home from his office. All of them, every piece of paper. Because she couldn't stand for them to be thrown away by strangers. She said she'd wake up at 3 a.m. and not be able to breathe. And the only thing that helped was knowing his things were still there, still in the house, still somewhere she could reach them. I understood that then. I did. But by the end of that month, the grief had started to stretch into something else. She'd come home from her evening walk with her arms full of things she'd pulled from neighbors. Trash cans, cardboard, bottles, food cartons still sticky with old takeout. I'd ask her why, and she'd press her hands to her temples and say she didn't know. She didn't know what was wrong with her. But she just had to do it. She just had to. The summer visit was worse. The one after that, I didn't make. Then I stopped trying. I know how that sounds. I spent a long time knowing how it sounded and doing it anyway, and then a longer time trying not to think about it. And now here I am. She's been gone for 3 weeks. The guilt and the grief arrived together, so tangled up in each other that I still can't tell them apart. I grieved a woman I hadn't really had in years. I felt guilty for things I did, and things I didn't do, and things that were maybe no one's fault at all. And I came back to clean her house because there was no one else. It took 5 days just to clear the bulk of it. I rented 2 dumpsters. I wore gloves and a mask and changed my clothes in the driveway before getting back in my car each evening. I stayed at a motel 6 minutes away, the kind with coin laundry, and I washed everything I'd worn to the house every single night. I have particular habits around cleanliness, have had them for years. My own version of my mother's disorder, running in the opposite direction. And this job tested every one of them. I scrubbed my hands until they cracked. I lay awake in the motel room, running through mental checklists. Had I touched my face? Had I been careful enough? Was I sure? The flies thinned as the food disappeared. I put up strips of tape along the ceilings and door frames and watched them fill. After the fourth day, I could walk through the house without swatting constantly, without that particular sensation of something landing on the back of my neck and having to resist the urge to leave and not come back. By the end of the fifth day, the house was clear. Not clean, not by my definition, but empty. The floors visible, the surfaces bare, the smell reduced to something faint and chemical that I could work with. I went back to the motel, showered for 40 minutes, and made a list of everything that still needed to be done. The deep clean started on day 6. I worked from the top down, room by room, the way I'd learned to do it. I scrubbed the bathroom tiles on my hands and knees, working the grout lines with a stiff brush until the original color came back. I wiped down every surface twice, then went back and did the corners I'd missed. I moved furniture away from walls and cleaned what was behind it. I took the light fixtures down and washed them in the sink. I was halfway through the bathroom grout when I noticed it. At first, I thought I'd imagined it. A low, flat sound just at the edge of what I could hear. The kind of sound that makes you stop and hold your breath and wait to see if it comes back. It came back, a steady, monotonous drone, directionless, seeming to come from everywhere and nowhere at once. I checked the fly tape. The last few stragglers had stuck overnight. The room was clear. I went back to the grout. The sound didn't go away. I put on music, turned it up until the volume made my ears ring, and worked through the afternoon like that. But even past the music, past the scrape of the brush against tile, something was underneath everything else. A vibration more than a sound, something that entered through the soles of my feet and traveled upward. I turned the music off at some point in the late afternoon, and the drone was still there, fuller now, more insistent, as if it had been waiting for me to stop pretending not to hear it. I thought about my mother. I thought about her standing in this same house, this same hallway, raising her voice over a sound I was only now willing to fully hear. I thought about how I'd looked at her when she denied it, how certain I'd been that she was lying. I moved through the house with my palm flat against the walls. The hallway first, nothing. The kitchen, nothing, or almost nothing, a suggestion. The living room. I stopped in the doorway because the vibration coming through the plaster was strong enough to feel like a second heartbeat against my hand. I stood there and listened, my pulse loud in my ears, and I followed the wall toward the corner where the sound was thickest. The hole was small, 2 inches maybe, a few feet above the baseboard, the edges rough like something had worked its way through from the inside. I'd missed it in the initial clean-out. I crouched down and put my eye to it. Movement, a constant, seething movement in the dark. I pulled back and straightened up and stood very still. The wall in front of me felt warm. I hadn't noticed that before, but now I couldn't unfeel it. The plaster radiating a faint, low heat against my palm. The whole wall. Not a pipe, not the sun through the window. Something alive, packed floor to ceiling, behind 8 inches of plaster, generating its own warmth. The crack started at the hole and spread upward slowly, catching the light. Then another, branching sideways. A sound like a knuckle popping, once, then several times in quick succession. I stepped back. The wall came apart. Not violently, that's what I keep telling myself, because violence would be easier to process. It came apart the way things do when they've been under pressure for a very long time. And something finally gives. The plaster fell outward in pale chunks, and behind it was the comb. Not a nest, not something improvised, but architecture. Hexagonal cells packed from the floor to the ceiling, uniform and precise, built from a brown-gray material like compressed paper. Something had been constructing this inside my mother's walls for years, layer by layer, season by season. While she lived here, while she brought in the paper and the food and didn't know why she was doing it. I understood then. I understood all at once, standing in the dust and the spilling cold air, why she couldn't stop, why she couldn't explain it, why she'd looked at me with those helpless, frightened eyes and said, "I just know I have to." The wasps came through the broken wall in a slow, almost formal procession. Not frantic, not attacking, moving with a deliberate, organized calm that was somehow worse than an assault would have been. They filled the room without touching me. Dozens of them, then more, circling in wide, slow patterns, the collective sound of their wings building, until I could feel it in my back teeth. I stood in the center of it and didn't move, because moving felt like the wrong thing to do. Like I was a guest who hadn't been asked to leave yet. She came last. She was enormous. Larger than anything living had any right to be. The size of my fist, her abdomen swollen and heavy, and iridescent where the light caught it. Her wings moved in short, effortful bursts, struggling under her weight. She moved through the air toward me with a kind of patience that I can only describe as deliberate, purposeful. Like she'd been waiting. Her eyes were black all the way through, no iris, no variation. They found mine and held. I didn't run. I've thought about this since, and I don't fully understand why I didn't run. She hovered in front of my face for what felt like a very long time, long enough that I started to notice things. The faint smell of something sweet coming off her, like overripe fruit. The slight drag in her right wing, working harder than the left. The way the other wasps had gone completely still around us. She moved behind me slowly. I felt her land on the back of my neck, light as a finger being placed with care. Then the stinger went in, and the pain was bright and total, and I didn't feel the floor coming up to meet me. I don't know how long I was out. The light is different now, lower, coming in at a different angle. So I think it's been several hours. Maybe more. The sound is still here. It's changed. It doesn't feel like an intrusion anymore. It feels like, and I know how this will read, I know. It feels like something familiar, like the particular frequency of a house you grew up in. Like my mother's hand on my back when I was small, the low hum she'd make when she was trying to get me to sleep. I've been sitting against the wall with my laptop, writing this, trying to hold on to something. Some version of myself that still has reasons and explanations. The compulsion is there already, warm and patient, waiting for me to stop resisting. I want to go to the dumpsters. I want to bring things back. Paper, specifically. I keep thinking about the paper, the dry smell of it, how many cells it could fill. My hands are shaking a little, not from fear. I know what happened to my mother now, not the clinical version, Not the version I used to tell myself. Mentally ill grief response didn't get help in time. The real version. I understand what lived inside these walls while she carried food in from strangers' garbage and couldn't sleep and couldn't explain herself to a daughter who was already halfway out the door. I'm sorry, Mom. I should have stayed. I should have tried to understand instead of leaving. I keep thinking about the mat she used to keep by the front door. The sunflower one. Shake it out every Sunday, she used to say. Don't track the outside world in with you. I wonder if the outside world was ever really the thing she was trying to keep out. As soon as I finish this, I'm going to go outside. There's still plenty in the dumpsters. Meat, paper, packaging. Everything the hive needs to keep building. I know I'll go. I've known since I woke up. I just wanted to write it down first, while some part of me still remembers not wanting to. I think about my mother a lot differently now. The way I left, the way I stayed gone. I keep turning it over. But here's the thing I can't stop thinking about. By the time I came back, was there any version of her that could have been saved? Or did she stop being only herself the first winter I came home and found the house like that? If you were me, knowing what you know now, would you have stayed? September 14th. 8:47 in the evening. I remember the exact time because I checked my phone right when JC opened the door, the way I always do when I'm at her house, out of habit more than anything else. She has a rule about the 9:30 cutoff, and I've never once pushed back on it. But I always like to know exactly how much time I have left. That was the last normal moment of the night. JC and I have been friends for about 6 years. She's the kind of person who's difficult to explain to someone who hasn't met her. Pitch black hair, dark clothes, a nose ring, a few tattoos on her forearms that she's never fully explained. Her porch has had pumpkins on it every September I've known her, even when it was 80 degrees outside. She has a wind chime made of black glass that makes a sound like something settling rather than something musical. And she has a welcome mat at her front door that reads, in clean white letters, "Leave now." I always thought that was funny. I thought a lot of things about JC were funny back then. She opened the door and looked at me for a full 3 seconds before she said anything. She does this every time, stands in the doorway and looks at you like she's confirming something, like she needs a moment to verify that you're who she was expecting. I've never asked her about it. Some things with JC you just accept. "Ralph," she said finally, "you're on time. I'm always on time. You were 4 minutes late in March." That's JC. I smiled, and she stepped aside to let me in. Her house smelled like cinnamon. Not candle cinnamon, not the artificial kind, real cinnamon. The kind that means someone has been baking, that there's something warm in an oven or cooling on a counter somewhere nearby. I'd been hoping for cookies since she'd mentioned the movie night earlier that week, and the smell made it seem plausible. I didn't say anything about it because with JC you don't push, but I noticed it. She brought out a bowl of popcorn and 2 sodas, and we settled in on the couch. Halloween too. Her pick, which surprised me not at all. I want to say something about JC before I get into what happened that night, because I think it matters. About 3 years before this, JC had been in what I can only describe as the most solid relationship I've ever personally witnessed. Her and Tyler. I know that sounds like something people say. They were so perfect together, but I mean it in the literal sense. They balanced each other in a way that felt architectural, like each of them was load-bearing for the other. Tyler was loud where JC was quiet, warm where she was guarded. He'd walk into a room and immediately start talking to whoever was nearest, and JC would stand slightly behind him and watch him do it with this small, private smile like she found him genuinely amusing and was never going to tell him. Then, one day they weren't together anymore. No fight that anyone witnessed, no public fallout, no explanation passed along through mutual friends. One day Tyler was there, and the next day he simply wasn't. And JC didn't talk about it. And eventually people stopped asking. What I noticed in the months after was the 9:30 rule. It might have existed before. I genuinely can't remember, but it became firm after Tyler left, non-negotiable. No exceptions, no matter how good the movie was, or how deep a conversation had gone. At 9:15, she'd start glancing at the clock. At 9:25, she'd start wrapping things up. By 9:30, you were outside on the porch saying goodbye, whether you were ready or not. I assumed it was a grief thing, a control thing, a way of managing a space that had become hers alone. I didn't ask about it. I should have asked. There's a framed photo above her fireplace of her and Tyler. I noticed it during halftime of the movie. JC had gone upstairs to find another one to watch, and I wondered a little, the way you do in a friend's house, when you're comfortable enough to move around, but still aware that you're a guest. The photo was from somewhere outdoors, some trail or overlook, both of them squinting into the sun. Tyler's arm around her shoulder, JC's small, private smile. I was still looking at it when she came back down the stairs with a Saw 4 DVD held up like a question. "Sure," I said, and didn't mention the photo. I don't know if she saw me looking. She didn't say anything. Saw 4 is not a good movie. JC fell asleep about 40 minutes in, which I respected, because 40 minutes of Saw 4 is probably the correct amount. I watched the rest of it half paying attention, aware the whole time of the clock on my phone. 8:53, 9, 9:11. At 9:15 I got up carefully, trying not to wake her, and went to the kitchen for a glass of water. The tray of cinnamon cookies was on the counter, cooling. A full tray, more than 2 people would eat watching movies. I stood there for a moment looking at them, smelling them, and I thought about the fact that JC had baked them, but hadn't offered them, hadn't brought them out, had brought popcorn instead. Something about that felt slightly off, the way small wrong details sometimes do when you notice them, but can't explain why. I helped myself to one anyway. She wouldn't miss one. The kitchen window faces the backyard. There's a row of trees back there, maybe 40 feet from the house, and beyond the trees it gets dark fast. No streetlights back there, no neighboring houses visible. I stood at the sink, running the water warm, looking out at the tree line, not really thinking about anything. The cookie was good. Of course it was. That's when I saw his face in the window. Just for a second, maybe less than a second, before I jumped back and knocked my elbow against the counter hard enough that I felt it all the way up to my shoulder. A face. A man's face, close to the glass, looking in. I don't know what I said. Something loud, because JC was in the kitchen doorway almost immediately, still half asleep, her hair pushed sideways from the couch cushion. What? What happened? There's someone outside. My voice came out steadier than I expected. At the window, I saw his face. JC went very still. Call the police, I said. Right now. Someone was looking in through your kitchen window. She didn't move toward her phone. She was looking at the window, not at me. And her expression was doing something I hadn't seen on her face before. Not fear exactly. Something older than fear. Something that looked like a person recognizing a thing they'd been dreading for a long time. JC, call the police. What did he look like? Still looking at the window. I don't know. A man, I only saw him for a second. She laughed. It came out strange, too short, too sharp, like a sound that escaped before she could stop it. You're tired, she said. The movie put you in that headspace. It's nothing, Ralph. Time to go. I'm not leaving you here alone after. I'll be fine. That's not. I'm fine. Go home. I was about to push back harder when I caught movement through the living room window. The same man, or a shape I was reading as a man, something upright moving along the outside of the house. I pointed and JC turned and went still again, and this time she didn't laugh. The bang against the front door hit like something had thrown its full weight against it. Not a knock, not a fist. The pictures on the hallway wall swung crooked, and something small fell off a shelf. And the sound of it rolled through the whole house. JC's was already moving toward the front door. I thought she was going for her phone, or for the deadbolt to make sure it was locked. But she planted herself directly in front of the door and put her back against it and looked at me. Ralph, you need to leave. Right now. Out the back. We need to call. Please. Her voice had dropped to something quieter. Not calm, something past calm, something on the other side of it. Please, Ralph. Go. I'm not leaving you in here with someone. Ralph. She closed her eyes for a second. Do you remember what I told you? About Tyler? About that woman they went to see? I did, vaguely. Tyler and JC had gone through a phase. This was maybe 4 years ago now, of being interested in everything. Religion, philosophy, obscure history. A friend of theirs had connected them with an old woman who lived outside of town, up in the hills, who claimed to practice witchcraft. I'd heard the story in pieces over the years. I'd treated it the way you treat most things like that, with the polite half-attention of someone who doesn't want to be rude about something they don't believe in. JC and Tyler had apparently laughed at the woman. Not cruelly, I think, not intentionally, but enough. Openly enough. And the woman, according to JC, had not responded mercifully. Tyler disappeared 2 weeks later. Standing in JC's hallway with the door shaking in its frame, I thought about the story differently than I had before. JC, I said carefully, what exactly did that woman do? Another bang, harder this time. One of the crooked pictures fell completely off the wall and hit the floor face down. I moved her gently aside before she could stop me and looked through the peephole. I need to try to describe what I saw, and I need you to understand that I've been trying to find the right words for months, and I'm still not sure I have them. The porch light was on. The circle of the peephole was clear, and what I saw in that circle was a man, or the shape of a man, something that had been a man, crouched on the porch boards on all fours. Not the way a person crouches, but lower, flatter. Weight distributed the way an animal distributes its weight. His head was turned up toward the door. His neck bent at an angle a neck shouldn't bend to. He was thin in a way that went past thin. His ribs pressed against his skin from the inside, each one visible, the skin stretched over them like something pulled too tight. His arms were wrong at the joints. Not broken wrong, reshaped wrong, like the bones had been convinced to go somewhere else. His eyes were open, completely black, edge to edge, the way an eye looks in total darkness when the pupil has swallowed everything else. He was absolutely still, except for his head, which moved in these small rapid shifts side to side, too fast, the way a bird moves when it's tracking something. And then he opened his mouth. I pulled back from the peephole. I don't know how long I stood there in the hallway. Not long. Long enough that JC had time to go to the kitchen and come back. And when I turned around, she was standing behind me, holding the tray of cinnamon cookies in both hands. Her face was dry now, composed, the expression of someone who has made a decision. JC, don't. She put her hand on the door handle. JC, they're still his favorite, she said. She opened the door and walked outside and pulled it closed behind her. I stood at the peephole for a moment and then couldn't and went to the living room window instead. The angle wasn't perfect, but I could see most of the porch and the steps and the dark yard beyond. JC had crouched down, not afraid. The way you crouch down to be at eye level with something smaller than you. She placed the tray on the porch boards, and I watched the thing that had been Tyler move toward it. It ate from the tray the way it was crouched, on all fours, head dipping down, fast and intent. JC sat beside it on the porch boards without touching it. At first, her arms around her own knees, watching it eat. The light from inside caught the side of her face. Then she reached out and put her hand on the back of its head, very slowly. The thing went still for a moment when she touched it, the way an animal goes still when it's deciding whether to trust something. Then it kept eating, and JC sat beside it on the cold porch boards in September, with her hand resting on its head, and her face in the light was doing that small private smile. The smile from the photograph above the fireplace. When the tray was empty, it lifted its head and looked at the tree line for a long moment. Then it moved. That's the only word for it. Not ran, not walked. It moved, covering the yard in seconds, gone into the trees before I'd fully registered that it had started. I was still standing at the window when JC came back inside. She stopped at the foot of the stairs and looked at me, and she had that look on her face again. The one where she's waiting to see if you've figured it out. Giving you the room to get there yourself. I had. Tyler always did like those cookies, I said. She looked at me for a long moment. Something in her face shifted, just slightly, just for a second, and then she nodded once and went upstairs. I let myself out. The welcome mat said leave now, and for the first time, I understood that it wasn't a joke. I don't know what that old woman in the hills did, or how she did it, or whether there's a word for what Tyler is now. What I do know is that JC has been setting a tray of cinnamon cookies on that kitchen counter every single night for 3 years. Every night at the same time, and every night at 9:30, she makes sure there's no one else in the house when she opens the door, because whoever else might be watching, that's between her and Tyler. Nobody else is to see. People have asked me since whether JC should try to find that woman again, whether there's a way to reverse it, to bring him back. And I genuinely don't know how to answer that, because I'm not sure what back would mean after 3 years of this. I'm not sure JC would want it even if it were possible. She still has his photo above the fireplace. She still bakes his favorite cookies. She still goes out to the porch every night at 9:30 and sits with him in the dark while he eats. What would you call that, if not love? And if it were someone you loved, if this were the only way left to be with them, would you do the same? Or would you let them go?